Good evening, everyone. We'll call the meeting to order and start with the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands.
Roll call, please.
Here. Here.
Here. Chairperson Bregoff.
Here. We're missing Commissioner Rothbart.
Oh, still calling out. Commissioner
Rothbart,
not here.
he's not here. Okay, the first item of business is approval of the minutes of August 3rd, 2023. And I'll entertain a motion to approve and second, and then we can discuss.
I'll second.
Okay. Any discussion? Any changes, questions? I don't see anything. All right, so all in favor? Any opposed? All right, the minutes are approved. Do we have any visitors wishing to address the Plan Commission today? We have our usual friendly faces. No new business, so we can go directly to the old business, which is the continued discussion of the sub-area plan amendment to the comprehensive plan for the Walters Kluwer site to consider possible land uses other than office and research. Bruce, do you have some intro comments before we talk to Lee?
I've decided that you would be better served having someone else make comments to you. So we asked Lee from Tesco Associates to make some suggestions, one of which was to devise some tours, which we'll talk about, where we can go out on our own and look at some other types and styles of properties. And that's what Lee's going to talk about.
It's a pleasure to be with you. I would give the background that says this is our opportunity to do a little planning before we get into the potential drafting of tools to make it work. And the problem is that we often have this need to respond to a developer who has brought something to us, familiar or unfamiliar with the nature of that. And we rely on the zoning ordinance and our guidelines to respectfully consider what they're presenting to us and determine whether it fits the community. Sometimes we do that without the background on how those standards or how those measurements, whether they be how much open space, how much building it is, how those were derived in the first place. I think we're at a place that we can directly talk about how they should be derived before we put them down on paper. And so we use a tool that has a whole series, more than 500 locations around the country that has residential development, what it looks like from an air photo, what it looks like from the street view, what the subdivision looks like, and densities that go with it. The problem is that if I were to bring those pages to you, it's really hard to consider what it might feel like. And something I said during the discussion of the federal life property proposal was that sometimes the numbers aren't as important as recognizing how do we create a living environment that we think our residents would prefer to be in. So what I hope we can do is have some real examples where you're able to go into other communities that have built types of residential units in arrangements that are different from what you see around Riverwoods itself, that will help you understand that there are a number of items that make it work, make it feel comfortable, make it safe, and that doesn't rely on purely looking at the height of the building and the number of square feet of the units, et cetera. So if we can hit the forward on this, skip past this. This was, I wanted to start. Easy enough. And what I handed out a few minutes ago was an updated memorandum after the chair took the first shot at the tour. We found some errors, so we corrected that in the updated memorandum. And then there are a series of photographs and map images that I think that you will find helpful if you take the tour. I wanted to start with what most planners look at when they do touring like this, to try to come up with an idea of the things that we look for. So the first question I ask is, does this constitute a neighborhood? So we're going to go to a series. I hope you will take these tours, and I hope you will drive to them and park so that you have an opportunity to look around and ask yourself some questions. Is this a neighborhood? Is it a place that lends itself to a positive human interaction? We were trying, Michael Blue, who's with me this evening, he and I were trying to figure out a good definition of what constitutes a neighborhood. That's what we came up with. The second question is, does the home orient to the public so that it welcomes visitors to the front door? I think you are going to see some examples where that works very well and some examples where it isn't working. Does the landscaping make the dwellings more attractive? Does the landscaping provide shade? These are simple questions rather than just looking at lawn and foundation plantings. Are there enough lush landscaping in these areas that create a comfortable environment for those who live there? Where's the parking? Does the vehicle parking dominate the public image of the dwelling? Meaning, is it parking lots? Is it parking courts that have just garage doors and open parking? Or is there a door there that represents the entry that you would want to go into? Do individual units have private open space? Are there any public open spaces? Do the streets seem difficult to navigate? Is it obvious how they're handling the waste, whether that's a dumpster or a container in the garage that's brought out to the street? How is mail handled? Is it individual unit by unit, or is there a group mail space? How are delivery vehicles accommodated? If you ask these questions as you're going to these places, you're going to get a better sense of what's making this function well, or what is it that I really don't like about this space? If you can go to the next slide. So we hope that it leads us to developing, if there's a tool to support a new kind of development in the community, whether that be a new zoning district that follows a change to the comprehensive plan, or a new plan unit development, or whatever that might be, there's likely to be a series of conditions in there that we want to measure these developments against. The first one is the circulation safe, and is it understandable to someone who doesn't live there every day? Can you navigate through this development? Is it comfortable? Are there comfortable and attractive public spaces, not just the parks or open spaces, but also is the driving areas, if these are public roads, and the sidewalks and the lawns, is that a comfortable characteristic? And in other communities, we've talked about what amounts to the relationship that the roadway and the sidewalks and the open space, that relationship of that space to the buildings, and whether they are framed well in a way that you feel there's two ends of the spectrum. One is a prairie where you don't get any enclosure, and the other end of the spectrum is the canyon that is LaSalle Street in downtown Chicago. Very tall buildings, fairly narrow in space. So somewhere in the middle are comfortable spaces in the environment that you are approving. Essentially, are these 2-story buildings or 3-story buildings or 4-story buildings, and how do they relate across the street? Again, the standards that we put in place would require, presumably, usable open space. Define places where people can defend their private space. Is the parking adequate in terms of numbers? Is it unobtrusive, not being the primary characteristic of the development? And is it convenient to those people who are parking, who are visiting, to get to your front door? I stay away largely from the issues of architecture and style. We're dealing mostly here with the issues of what you would find in a development approval, and that's likely to go to the extent of saying that the materials should be attractive materials in this community, whether that's wood and stone and glass, or in many other communities, it's much broader than that. Do the buildings have details and fenestrations that diminish the sense of building bulk and monotony? Meaning, are there windows and doors? Are there breaks in the walls that set in and step back so that you don't have long walls that are undifferentiated? Is there maintainable site grading and site improvements? And the last one is, does the comprehensive stormwater management, is it an amenity or is it simply a tank? Is it just swales that you have to walk over, or have they put in rain gardens and other features to make it part of the attractive natural landscape? So we sent in that early memo a series of locations that I hope that you will consider going to. I'm going to go through them to talk a little bit about what I hope you will look for when you're out there. In addition to these, I'll hand those last 2 slides I put down in question form so that you might consider them when you're out there. So this first one is Heatherfield, which is in the southwest corner of Willow Road and Waukegan Road in Glenview. It's likely that you would enter from the north, and there, interestingly, is a whole series of different building types that are in this one subdivision. The first one, representing sort of the southern central section, are, so where the number 3 is, those are 6-unit buildings. When you go south of that, there are four buildings just above the number 1. Those are 3-unit buildings. Where the number 2 is, those are 4-unit buildings. These are entirely townhouses, with the exception of over by number 4, which is a 4-story building. There's an interesting addition, if you feel like going into the very northeast corner of this site, just to the right of the number 5. There's another building in there. It's another 4-story condo building that's not part of this development, built by a different builder. So I think the questions, again, and there are visual examples to the right representing the types of buildings that are there. Some of them are, some of them present an attractive building with a traditional garage opening to a driveway that connects to the roadway. The 4-story building has parking underneath. The differences in these building types, they're almost all 2-story buildings, but the style and the densities within this site vary on the basis of how many units are in one building. Someone's going to ask the question, who built this? Lexington built it. Want to go to the next one?
Can we stop there for 1 second?
Sure.
Back to that. That was 80 acres. I remember you saying 1.4 units to the acre. Gross acres, that would have been about 40 units on federal. Right to me, and I don't know, I suppose is everything.
It's wetlands for the most part.
So,
We didn't really count that as part of the density.
okay, so what I'm getting at is that at times when you look at something like this, just thinking about some of the things you mentioned, is it a living environment? How do people interact? Is there usable public space? Those are good questions to think about as you walk through this. But even and I don't know how to account for the wetland area over there, but even at 4 units to the acre, if you look at it and think of something like that, it does cover a lot of the land. And some of the illustrations we got that people had suggested in the case of Federal Life, or some of the things I've even heard, for Baxter, ranch homes, a few empty nester, they sort of had this idea of kind of like thatched cottages scattered loosely across the countryside. But when you look at this, you see that 3.8 units to acre it's a denser pattern than anything that we're really accustomed to, but it's fairly low density in most other communities, I would say. But I mean, it's just something I would say, maybe keep this in mind as we look at different pictures, that if you find something you really like, you might find something, it may not be this one, but you may find something that is really nice and has a lot of these features, but is still 3 units to the acre or still 4 units to the acre.
An excellent point. I mean, I'm hoping that you're going to be able to look and understand and perceive and make notes to yourself and then look back and see what the density was, rather than sort of prejudicing your own view to say, I'm going to like it because it's 3.x number of units per acre. The point that you raised about the open space. So I'm fairly comfortable in assuming that they got credit for that wetland as part of their total density. That wetland area we didn't calculate that for the 3.8. That 3.8 is sort of net, meaning that it just covers the areas that are developed, not the wetland. I think that if you counted the wetland, you'd end up with something closer to 3 or 2.8 dwelling units to the acre. It's furthering your point, which is even at that lower density, there's a lot of building there. The question is, if you live there, if your daughter bought that home, would that be a comfortable living environment? To the east of that site, so we are now east of Waukegan Road by about a quarter of a mile at the most. It's the first traffic light to the east of Waukegan on Willow, is Fox Meadow Lane. And this, again, is a mix of unit types, but only two. There's a townhouse, there are a group of townhouses, and there are a group of single-family homes that are considered either zero lot line or very tight clusters. So it's not the traditional side yards that you would anticipate in a conventional subdivision. These are put together so that they are taking a very small footprint, and they are, you will, my suspicion is that you may have trouble deciding which ones are the single-family units and which ones are the townhomes because of the clustering that occurs here. Next slide. Further south on Waukegan Road, just about a mile south of Willow, is Winnetka Road. In that, I guess it's the northeast quadrant of that intersection, is a actually somewhat older subdivision. It's now getting to be 20 years or so. The developer was Bleets. They have two types of buildings in this one cluster. Two buildings are condominium villas, as they call them, multi-story. I think at its peak, it may be 50 feet in height. The rest of the units are detached single family, again in relatively tight clusters. There are two entries to Winnetka, so you can make a bit of a loop here, going in and then coming back out the other roadway. They get their density, 5.6 dwelling units to the acre, because of those two taller, denser villa buildings. I think if you just look at the single family detached, you'd be closer to that 3.8 that you saw on the other two. Go ahead. This is north on Waukegan Road by, I don't remember what I wrote in here, 1.5 miles. I measured it out, but this is single family only with, they were able to cluster the homes in a very tight manner to protect the wetlands to the west. So the area that is listed, the two dwelling units to the acre in this instance includes the wetlands that are up against Waukegan Road. I don't have a laser with me, but do you see, this is a dead end, except that there's a connection to roads to the north. But all of those are single family detached buildings. You can see the picture on the lower image. I wanted to include some single family detached amongst the things that you looked at, as opposed to nothing but townhomes. Next one. The chair, you said, Lori, you didn't get a chance to get to this one. Yeah. Oh, you did. There's two types of units here. The townhomes in a very dense pack subdivision where the townhomes are either in units of 4, 5, or 7. I don't know how they picked that, but that's the way they built it. And those are all in they are surrounded on the north and the east by condo buildings. They're all part of one development. You will enter presumably on Brentwood and then go to the dead end or so, and you'll be facing the condos. So the units that are pictured in number 1 on the right, those are the townhomes. And then the units that you sort of bump into at the end of that drive, Brentwood, are the condos that are 3 stories in a denser development. This has parking in garages that are individual to the units that are owned, and they didn't bury the parking like many of the sort of better ways of handling this. And so you get a lot of garage door exposure on the street, which I think is, if not offensive, it's certainly not as attractive as the way they handled the parking for the townhomes. You'll see both in there. Okay, go ahead. So I'm going to run through a whole series of other ones that weren't in your first packet, but they're in the handout that I gave you tonight. And as a group, you can decide whether you want to take them all before your next meeting or you want to break it up into separate trips. So this group includes another mix of home types, and they range from something that's very close to Riverwood, just over Lake Hook Road, and in the corner that is the southwest corner of Lake Hook and Sanders. That's Villas North. Can you go down one screen? So, oh, there you go. And this has, so what's across the street, I guess, is Discovery. Thank you. The units on number 1 have 4 units in the building. They're townhomes. The units that are in number 2 vary. They're 3 and 4, but they're a slightly different architecture and a different style. I think that the densities are pretty similar in total. This is 4.7 dwelling units to the acre if you don't include that Salceda Park, which I think was actually part of the single family development to the south. Yep. No, that's, okay. I don't know that, I mistakenly put this down as Villa North because there was some reference in the materials that was villas. But I'm only talking about those things that are accessible from Lake Cook Road, not those that were accessible from, yeah, Forest Road. You can take an extra field trip if you'd like.
But Carl, the one that you and Steve were telling me about, was that the one that's to the south?
Yeah, it's the one right down there at the bottom of the kind of curving road.
I thought it was called Villas North. It's not? I thought it was called Villas North. It's, oh.
Yeah, so I've mislabeled the area that I'm directing you to. So the question is, my memory is that Villas North is single family detached. Is that correct?
It is.
And the units that I'm showing you are all townhomes.
The conversation we were having was that I think that both of you thought that the single family detached homes would be an interesting unit type to consider in Riverwoods.
That's right. And I think they're pretty much what you're referring to as cluster homes, where, there's a bunch of them pretty closely spaced,
Right.
in a bunch of cul-de-sacs.
Small lots.
Right.
Typically on the order of a 9,000 to 10,000 square foot or smaller. I can amend it and send you graphics and data on those as well. Again, garage doors, but that, don't take that as a impediment. I think the fact is that they've done a reasonably good job of presenting front doors and front lawns in these units. For the density that they present, I found these to be closer to being what a single-family home would look like if it was expanded by 3 or 4 units. Go ahead. This is a much different location. This was the redevelopment of the Sara Lee manufacturing site in Deerfield on Waukegan Road. It is a mix of building types. The larger units are connected underground by their parking. The medium units, the townhomes have their own, and the single family have their own surface or garage parking. But the ability to get this development and the density that they ultimately get at 14.8 dwelling units an acre is driven by that underground parking. There is very little surface parking. Everything else is either in a garage within the unit or it's underground, which meant that the stormwater and the open space that is sort of ringed by the residential uses met the village's standards for impervious surface and open space and stormwater. They only were able to do that because of that underground parking. Go ahead. Bruce, this is Northfield Mews. It's the one. Interestingly, I'm going to show you three that are directly next to each other. So the number one is the Northfield Mews and the image of them on the right. Go to the next one.
Just go back to Northfield Mews. When the Plan Commission discussed amending the comprehensive plan before Lexington came in, we looked at the elevations for Northfield Mews as an example of something we thought was pretty good. Just when you drive by, if you look at it, from 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, we looked at it. The funny thing was when we were still in the throes of the Lexington proposal, I called up Bob Hammer, who was the architect's firm designed this building. I said, Bob, I don't understand, what could be done to make the Lexington product better? And I went and I pulled out the elevations from Northfield Mews and I put them one on top of the other. I sent it to him in an email. I said, I'd never even had done that before, but looking at it, Northfield Mews is so much better. Why is it better? And Lee and I looked at it as well. Well, because it had some stone, it had different size windows and fenestration. It just looked a lot more residential and less austere. And Steve and I were talking, and the Lexington elevations had this vertical, uninterrupted vertical thrust through all these windows, all alike. So if you go look at it, I'm curious to know if you still like it. And I think it has a lot of design lessons of things that we recognized intuitively, we recognized as useful things that weren't followed through when we later.
It is a very dense, seemingly feeling dense development. In part because there's no big open space, there's no private open spaces. It is a court, similar to the court that Lexington was trying to present, but I think it's the units themselves are much more humanely built. So the contrast to that, directly to the east of it, in those red roofed buildings, if you'll go down one slide, directly east of that is another development called Woodview. I think you're going to see a dramatic difference in character between these two units that are door against door. These present simple facades, lots of garages that are the primary view of the building itself. And the density is basically the same. Flip back and forth between the two. One is 14 dwelling units an acre, and the one on the corner is 15.6. Directly south of these two developments is what's called Meadow Lake. It's the same developer as Coromandel. It uses the same ability to park under the buildings. And the buildings are interconnected through that parking. That is a pretty significant permit water feature. It's not just a stormwater detention. It's an open lake, if such. This is directly across the street of New Trier West, the high school. You should be, many of these are relatively private little enclaves, and you know, don't point and don't take pictures. It's an opportunity to unobtrusively observe these and drive slowly and carefully through, and then get back to the street and make notes. We will forward to you another detailed sort of step-by-step to make it to these locations and how to go through. And Lori, I will drive it again to make sure that it works. One more in this group.
I want to just jump in one little thing. You might want to take a look at this. So in the old days, my firm actually represented the developer who did my old firm years ago, Meadow Lake and Coromandel. And I was involved in other projects where parking was underground, but that has fallen out of disfavor because of economics. It's really, really expensive. And I don't know what your experience is today. I'd be curious to know how often in new sort of, suburban developments, villages are getting developers to bury the parking underground. And one of the things that I thought was true, I might have been wrong about this, was that a lot of the property in Riverwoods is very difficult to put in underground parking. And, like for example, in the case of the Federal Life parcel, where you're surrounded by floodplain, think of how many times here in South Riverwoods we've told homeowners you really shouldn't have a basement. Some of them put one in, but you really shouldn't have a basement. So it is, to me, it's undoubtedly a better plan. It just is great when the parking is underground, because the parking is underground and then you have all this nice stuff. But it would be really interesting to know whether that is going to be feasible in the kind of locations we have. Which is
It's market driven, and you're absolutely right, Bruce, that the expense of that underground parking is significant. Another version of this same system, if you will, is Kelmscott Park, which is in Lake Forest at the northern end of their downtown. The redevelopment of what had been their public works yard center, just west. It's at Western and Laurel, and the city's maximum FAR and impervious surface standards drove the developer to put the parking under the building again. And so they were able to get 49% open space on the site because they put no surface parking for condos and apartments.
Okay. Hello. Did they get a bonus density for units because of the open space they could create? In other words, did it work that way?
I don't think so, but they got tax increment financing to subsidize the cost of the redevelopment of that site. We are seeing, I'm reviewing a development in Wisconsin right now for, believe it or not, 840 apartments. And they're putting two levels of parking, one below grade and one above grade. What we're seeing more often here in the Chicago metro area is the Texas wrap, which is essentially a surface parking structure that wraps all of the residential around the outside of it. And the reason that it's popular is in part, there is no underground parking. It's surface and above. And it's almost always not exceeding 4 stories, which means that they're allowed to use wood stick-built construction. And that means that they can get adequate numbers of parking spaces, yet you still get a visual aspect of this building that doesn't look like a parking structure. The Elaine, you may be aware of this fairly massive development on 94, on the Edens at, what is it, Dundee? That's an example of that Texas wrap. Bruce, you want to introduce this one?
The Hayward Road Gardens. This is at the corner of Hayward Road and Winnetka Road. I think it's technically in Northfield, a little part of Northfield that steps this far.
Maybe unincorporated, actually.
Is it not? Because I believe the review was done in Northfield. I have this PUD,
Okay.
actually. Yeah. So this was a nursery, was I think a 7 or 8 acre parcel. They ended up with 6 homes, so roughly 2 homes to the acre. And these homes are primary bedroom on the ground floor, bedrooms upstairs, all the landscaping is common area. So it's low maintenance, clustered homes. The homeowners have no responsibility for the exterior. It's all done by association. The houses are about the 3,500 square feet in size, I think, from memory. They sold like pancakes for people in Winnetka and Northfield. I mean, they sold like pancakes. And I think the price when they went on the market, this is probably 8 or 10 years ago. I'm thinking, maybe not.
Feels more like 6.
Maybe 6. I mean, my memory is that they were in the $1.5 million to $2 million range. So to get an upscale, nice, new single-family home of 3,500 square feet, you know, it's probably, maybe some of them are 3,000 square feet. I think of this as a prototype for what a lot of people in Riverwoods would find very palatable, heavily landscaped. It answers a question a lot of people in Riverwoods have, but I don't always believe it when people in Riverwoods say they want to downsize, that they want to go to 2,000 square feet. I live in 2,000 square feet, but I don't believe a lot of people in Riverwoods want to do that. Nick had some sketches that we looked at where the houses on Walters Clear side were going to be either, some of them, the attached homes were 1,500 to 2,000, 2,200 square feet. So part of this exercise is go in some spaces like that. We heard comments here at the Plan Commission that the townhomes that Lexington were proposing were too small. So I'm drawing all these connections because if the people in our community want to downsize, but what they really have in mind is 3,000 feet or 3,500 feet. And I think even Villas North, those units are smaller than that, I think. And you're talking about something of the quality of Hayward Road Gardens, if you look at it. And you imagined a low maintenance, clustered single family community that primarily appealed to people without children, empty nesters, or, you know, there might be families with children there. But I know at the time it was everybody who wanted to get out of their big house wanted this product. The flip side of all of that is that if you go on the market today and see what these houses are selling for, of course, that's exaggerated by, you know, COVID and everything else. But just if you think about the cost of new construction, a 3,000 square foot house in today's market of this quality is probably $1.5 million or $2 million. So something to think about, like when you think about, okay, this would be great. We could have 40 or 50 of these someplace maybe. A lot of people would love them, but they wouldn't be starter homes. I mean, just from what I observed on this. That's my introduction. I wanted you to see it because effectively that is the zoning of Thorngate. Thorngate is 2 units an acre. So when Thorngate was being proposed, the then Mayor Roy Stanger, who was an architect, used to say to me, it would really be great if we could do clustered homes. We could make a much better development in Thorngate. Sorry, I mean no offense to you. That's what he said, that we could make a nice development there because we could do all kinds of contouring and open space, but he knew the community was very conservative and everyone would want to have their own home on their own, conforming lot. This is an example of clustered development. These homes don't meet the side yard requirements of a zoning district in Northfield. They don't meet the minimum lot size. They've stuck the homes together with the open space provided by the detention and called it a day, this was done as a planned development. And, so the advantage was you could create this kind of community instead of having houses each plopped on their own lot where you couldn't really achieve the same effect.
The other significant difference that these homes present to many, if not all of the other ones that I'm showing you this evening, is that this is largely first floor living. This is attractive to seniors and to empty nesters who don't want to climb stairs in a townhouse that's 2 or 3 stories. And part of the reason they can only get 6 units on here is to get the 3,000 to 3,500 square feet on a first floor basis. You're taking a lot of the space up with the unit itself. Okay, group 3, another shift. You can decide whether you want to go through this. These are largely to your north. I don't know why they're calling it Port Clinton Place. I'm used to. Yeah, well, okay. It's not Highland Park. It is in this case Vernon Hills. So here are 6 different unit types. Go ahead. This one is north of Old Half Day Road, directly to the west of, you'll never guess the name of this, Town Center Road. And there are basically townhomes, and on the north edge of that, there's a building that's a condo building. Look for how they've handled the garages versus the access points. There is open space on this site. Oh, by the way, so the next 6, I don't have the numbers on yet, and I will get those to you. The open space on the site is almost entirely stormwater management. It's not usable for the most part. Go ahead, next one. This is across the street, if you will, across Old Half Day Road with, again, townhomes. These are mostly 4 units to the building, but more of that single family like front entry. Go ahead. This is another half a mile to the west of those 2. This is again cluster single family, but man, are they clustered. Go ahead. Now we're headed a little bit south and west. This is Half Day Road as opposed to Old Half Day Road. And this is Beaconsfeld. It is single family home clusters, except that several of them are attached single family. So it's all owner occupied, but it's mostly 2 and 3 units per building. One more. Now this is literally directly west of that one that you just saw. It is, again, on Half Day Road. This is single family, clustered, very densely, very private, except that Michael tells me he uses it as a drop-off point. To the north and west of this is Stevenson High School. Directly north, adjacent to this is Stevenson High School. I'm guessing that the density here is closer to 5 than it is what we would have normally expect a single family home being 3 or 2. This is a very densely packed. But the interesting part to me is that there are a series of private spaces. This is not, the roads are narrow. They are inwardly focused, and there are private spaces. I think we have one more. This one's rather interesting. Again, a mix of building types, almost all townhomes, but the densities are different here because they're making use of what amounts to alleys. So instead of having total access off of the outside circulation, their driveway garage access is off of alleys. This, I think, is probably approaching, again, I won't guess, single family on the far eastern edge of that, but the remainder of it is townhomes. Questions?
One thing that I think a lot of these examples show I think if you think about the Wolters Kluwer site and you have maybe 13 acres out of 48 in the north that are all woods that you want to keep, that the site in a way is kind of calls out for some kind of clustering. Obviously you want to cluster away from the northern 13 acres. And one of I'm not seeing it so much when I see these aerials, I'm not seeing so much the advantage of clustering. But one of the presumed advantages when you do it is to create offsetting open space that while you have things that are tightly packed, shouldn't you feel that you're being rewarded with something else? So translating that to Wolters Kluwer, I would think that if you have density somewhere else on the site, it should in some way relate to the open space that you're trying to maintain and preserve there, and so that it doesn't feel as dense. It shouldn't be, that's what I'm hoping.
But Bruce, you're talking about open space and building units in the area excluding the 13 acres of woodland, right? Or are you counting the acres of woodland as part of the open space?
A developer would think that the 13 acres is maybe not the usable open space, although there could be trails in there. And I don't know how, I'll throw that back to Lee or Steve. I mean, that's an interesting question. I think that for the people who live there, they're going to need something that's usable in a way that, we in Riverwoods think the woods are usable. A lot of people don't think of them as usable, so I don't.
Well, there's several pieces of utility there. One is buffering to single-family homes to the north. Another is to preserve the nature of the woodlands for its environmental and sustainable characteristic. I would think that first we need to come to a conclusion of what is the character of the living environments before we jump to the conclusion that we're going to count the overall acreage, including the woodlands, to calculate our density. We still want whatever is developed to be attractive, maintainable, valuable to the extent that it maintains its value over time, and safe, et cetera. So that's why I think it's better to think about the nature of the living environment first before you get into a decision on what's the maximum density we can.
Yeah, and I wasn't even really thinking of density. I was just thinking of usable space versus woodlands.
I suspect that I have every reason to believe that the woodlands are untouchable from a policy standpoint. This community cherishes the woodlands. And so therefore the standards that you set for that development should maintain those woodlands. Not to say that there shouldn't be usable pathways through them if they can be done well. You know, I'm not the owner of that property, but they're going to try to get as much for the property as they possibly can. We have to show them that maintaining that woodland is going to increase the value of the remainder of the site. Actually, we shouldn't have to show them, but ultimately we have to rely on that.
Well, having done the first tour, is really quite a wide variety of styles. So I think people will find it very interesting. I mean, some of them are very attractive and some are really unattractive. So it's kind of a nice spectrum.
But ask yourself the question, what am I looking at? Why is it unattractive?
And I think the question of density tends to come up when the buildings are really, or the development is really unattractive. I don't know, if it's beautiful, people probably don't feel that it's badly dense, you know, that it's too dense. But if it's ugly, they're just going to grab anything. Well, thank you for your input. We'll continue to look for your input.
We will follow up with the, what we used to call when AAA had the triptych. Remember those? Turn by turn movement. We'll send that to you.
Because you had some driving corrections that you discovered.
Yes, a couple, which there are in the new.
That's been amended in this version.
Yeah, I did a lot of driving around and trying to get through gates and things.
Although if you think it makes sense, we can take out that Techney Road version if crossing that railroad is likely to be.
I just did it at a bad time. I mean, it was, you know.
There's always a railroad going through there, I think.
This was a really slow freight train that was almost not moving at all. It was just painful.
Can I ask a question? So most of these examples are kind of medium density compared to, say, the least dense sketch that we had from Nick at the last meeting, where we had maybe 60 homes and they were smaller, you know, sort of homes like 2-unit. I think most of them are kind of 2-unit buildings. And I thought there was a kind of a favorable impression from that, even though we might have recognized that it was maybe not as appealing to a developer, but we sort of, right? Did we? Was,
the 5 examples?
Yeah. So is there such a thing like that out there that we could look at? I mean, in other words, we're looking at things that are a jump up from what we have in the community.
Jump up in
density.
In density.
So is there an example out there that would more closely mimic kind of what some of us have looked at? And am I formulating the right question? I know you're thinking it, so I'm asking the question for you.
If I remember correctly, and I'm old, so I don't often remember correctly, there was a development on the north side of Willow, I'm pretty sure it was Willow, just in from Saunders that was single-family attached, single-story cluster. I have a friend who bought there, and I saw it once, but it was many years ago, and I don't remember the exact location. She loved it. She said it was maintained. The outside was maintained. She was an empty nester. And she made it about 4 years there before she moved to Florida. And now she's an empty nester in Florida. But she thought it was a wonderful concept. It was, I mean, there's one in Highland Park as well, I believe, across the street from the Botanic Gardens. And not quite to Green Bay, but close. That is single family cluster and condominium maintained. And that is magnificent, but that's not going to happen on this big place because it's like, I think there are like 10 houses there and that's it. But I've seen clustered single family, either duplex or triplex, that they can put in that are either 1 story or 1.5 stories with lower bedrooms. And that, it seems to me, would be ideal both for families and for seniors. And if we could get something that was maintained, it would be wonderful. And they could get a significant density in there and still leave it looking like housing and not stables.
Well, the landscaping makes a huge difference. The contouring makes a huge difference. The architecture makes a difference. I mean, all those things in these various developments that you pointed out, at least in the initial tour that I took. I mean, there's so many different elements that make some of them much more attractive than other things. And a lot of the developments are hidden. That makes, you can get a lot of housing in there if they're hidden, because then you don't see where all the dwelling is. So-
Did you have a clear favorite? You don't have to tell us because but did you have a favorite among
Yes,
those?
yes, I did. Some of them were surprisingly attractive.
Oh, okay.
1 or 2 I thought were really well done. I mean, I thought they were all too close to the street that I didn't like at all. But aside from that, I thought some of the housing was very attractive and some of the landscaping was beautiful. So it can be done.
Well, that's good. Well, then that tells us
I think it's a worthwhile tour to make. I
Yeah.
mean, at least the initial, whatever, 5 or 6 that I did.
The final equation and the thing that I dwell upon is ultimately we're going to have to come up with parameters. And those parameters are going to have to do with density, height, quality of construction, landscaping, open space, and all of those things. And I know that they all have to go into whatever kind of a development would be appealing to myself as a Riverwoods resident and hopefully the other residents of the community. But I have no idea how to reach those concepts.
There are several single-family only examples within this group. And I think whether they are sized similar to what you're calling for, which is a 3,000 or 3,500, I think more of them are 3,500, 4,500. Obviously we picked things that got built. Many of those things got built 10 years ago. I think that the mature trees definitely say this has been here for a few years. And you're going to have to imagine some of the newer ones that their trees will mature and eventually fill in. I think there is 2 groups of alternatives for the site that the Wolters Kluwer site. It's sort of the with and without the existing building. I'm not, from a professional standpoint, ready to give up on the adaptive reuse of that building. And if that were to include whether it's condos or senior or whatever, suddenly you throw out the whole density number because you're going to have significant density because of that building, and still have plenty of property, outside of the woodlands that can be further developed in a way that is conceivably at lower densities and still make the site work. But you're going to have to find someone who can take that relatively big floor plate. It's a wide building in its multiple positions that can make use of that, presumably for residential, but we shouldn't walk away from the potential that somebody else could still occupy it for another use.
So as far as the other many developments that are on the part 2 and 3 of the tours, I mean, we can all do all of those things, but it will take some time.
I'll give
I
you a
mean,
month.
Yeah, a month is about right, because the initial one, the 5 or 6, took me about an hour and a half. And that was on a holiday, so,
So the idea is that everybody hopefully has a chance in the next month, goes and looks as many of these as you can, takes notes, thinks about it, and then when we come back in October, we discuss what we found that we liked and didn't like.
A
Sounds-
question. What happens if somebody comes in with a proposal before we come back and decide what we want there?
There's a sign we got that says "Gone Fishing."
Okay, no, seriously, if someone comes in and says, okay, here's this, and I've got this proposal, and we say, well, this is going to be in a new zoning, but we don't quite know what the zoning is. I think that puts us in a very difficult position unless we say, hey, we've got to freeze for the next month or 2 until we get something down that we want, until we know.
It took Lexington, what, a year and a half? No one's going to be able to move that fast that you aren't going to be able to have some rational discussion on uses. And again, what we want to get to is, should there be an amendment to the comprehensive plan before we start talking about amendments to zoning? Let's figure out what's going to fit on this site in terms of uses, maybe even densities. But I think the step is think about how it fits with the comprehensive plan before we adjust any zoning or react to a development.
Well, but when we think about how it fits with the comprehensive plan, we may very well have to say, this is a new entity that needs to be done in a way that the comprehensive plan never referred to. And then you've got a chicken and an egg, which comes first here? Well, does it fit with the comprehensive plan? Well, we're planning on allowing multifamily for the first time in the history of the village. And does it fit with this? Well, we're doing that. And all of the doing is, there has to be a basis before you can build. And we don't have a basis right now, and that's what concerns me.
We are concerned, although that's why we're trying to get this.
I know,
We are.
I know,
trying to
but
get
I know
ahead.
there's some opportunistic somebody somewhere who says, yeah.
We can only go as fast as we can go, and
Yeah. But then what are our directions at this point? Do we talk about the comprehensive plan before we talk about a zoning change or addition? Or do we talk about a potential zoning addition and then fit that into the comprehensive plan?
I understand that from a professional planning perspective, you think about it in the plan conceptually, but I think in this village, and the fact that we only have, a small sub area that we're talking about, we could probably walk and chew gum at the same time.
I'm not sure I can, but I'm certain you can.
I'm sure we can. Oh, Trustee Hollander has a comment.
Oh, yes, Trustee Hollander, please take the microphone.
I have 3 observations or questions. One is, I wonder whether or not it might be beneficial as you move forward to differentiate density for buildable area, density for the lot as a whole, and how you make an interaction between the two. That is, that you may allow more or less density depending on if the density for the whole lot is lower than your limit, so that you would have more open space. But I don't know whether, I think you can probably set up density based on buildable area versus the whole lot itself. And that may give us some ability to control it. The second observation that I have is that we may have an idea of what it is we want. I don't know how to put that into zoning. In other words, if you would like to have a certain amount of open space between each individual unit versus an amount of open space that's communal, whether or not you can put that into a zoning definition. And the third question I have is if they meet all our recommendations, all the requirements of the zoning, but it looks lousy and everyone hates the way it looks, is that still possible to deny the applicant? And I think that's where everything is going to come down to, is whether or not you can define enough in the zoning to make the final product be acceptable to everyone. And if it's not acceptable, I don't know what our choices are.
Henry, are you talking about like an appearance review? Is that what you're getting at with it?
Yeah, we don't have that, and I'm not recommending appearance review. That came up as a subject several years ago. And what you think is not necessarily what someone else will. I think that's difficult unless you can define it beforehand.
Well, I think we are going to have appearance guidelines as part of the commercial development. We talked about appearance review in residential areas and said, no, that would be very tough. But Lee and I have talked a number of times that this kind of zoning would have to incorporate the design elements that help define what we could approve or not approve and give us a basis for not approving it based on appearance.
Okay.
The other question about density for the whole site versus, a part of the site, there's all kinds of ways to skin the cat on that. And I think getting to an idea of the kind of development we want in terms of usable common areas, living environment, things like that, those are actually more difficult to define than just coming up with raw density numbers, I think. Lee, would you?
I think you're speaking to two separate things. That one is, should there be a maximum number of impervious surfaces and buildings and the intensity in sub areas versus the overall density for the site? Frankly, conventional zoning, which is going to say, here's the height, here's the build. Conventional zoning is not going to be helpful in that situation. And that's why we're at least entertaining the notion that there could be a planned unit development ordinance that allows for relatively intense segments of the area, but the overall density has to meet another set of standards.
That's what I was trying to refer to between the density for buildable areas versus density for the whole lot. And the two may not necessarily be the same.
Yeah, we often see just an overall dwelling units per acre number, but most communities also have something that addresses impervious surface. It may have something that addresses FAR, although I'm not sure that that's always in our interest. But FAR is the total number of square feet of usable building on however many floors that building is divided by the overall area, right? And it's another measure of intensity. It wasn't originally intended to be used on residential sites. It was intended for commercial and office evaluation. But many communities build a whole list of these standards, but I will clue you in, there's always one limiting factor. It's different in every situation, but there's always one limit, right? It's we are limited because we need this much parking, or we are limited because of this much height, or we're limited because of the impervious surface ratio. And just having more of those standards doesn't mean that you're necessarily controlling it better. So we have to be careful that we're addressing our concerns about the intensity and how it fits within the community, but we don't want to just throw a set of numbers at it, I guess is what I'm trying to get to.
And I think the question came up if we get some sort of proposal tomorrow. Right now, it's not zoned residential. So if someone wants to put residential in there now, I think there's a long enough process for it to come up with an answer that there won't be any interference with what you're doing. I mean, if they want to put office space, that's one thing, but residential, it's not zoned for it yet.
At some point, I think that you should say, is there something other than residential that's acceptable on this site?
Not just acceptable, it's not just acceptable. I mean, it's not just acceptable to like the community. I mean, it's like to, how am I trying to, I was sitting there listening before, trying to figure out how am I going to say this. It's a different, you're trying to test the interest and desire of the outside, not the inside of the community. So you look and you go, oh, this is a big monstrosity. I don't really like it, but I like the small one. Well, that may be what you think, but that might not be what's going to get marketed here properly. What's going to,
You're addressing market reality,
yeah.
and we can't ignore it. Which is part of the reason that I was looking at a whole lot of buildings that already got built as examples, as opposed to, I can present to you lots and lots of plans that didn't get built.
All right, so our homework is to do the tours and come back with our comments for the next meeting in October.
And I have to say, I greatly appreciate the list of questions because they will help me look.
Yes, it's very helpful.
Good exercise.
Yeah, very, very good. Thank you, Lee. All right, I think, are we ready to move on? Everybody? Comments by the chairman. The only thing I'd like to say is I'd like to introduce Steve Witt, who is our new Director of Community Services in the village. Thank you for coming, and we look forward to working with you. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we're adjourned. Thank you.